Did you know an estimated 5% of the global population has ADHD? And the number is growing. And while many face unique challenges, there's an inspiring narrative of resilience and innovation that often goes untold. In this episode, we're joined by an extraordinary guest, Dave Thompson, a neurodiversity leader and self-advocate with ADHD. Together, we'll explore the intricate balance individuals with ADHD navigate, from a need for support and understanding to pushing back against misconceptions and biases that can be barriers to employment and success. Hi, I'm Dr. Teresa Haskins, and welcome to Think Differently, the podcast that challenges the status quo and explores the power of neurodiversity to create a more inclusive and accessible world. Together, we will talk about everything from the value of different perspectives to the limitless potential of human beings. We'll explore how embracing differences can lead to endless possibilities and how you can maximize strengths to make a positive impact on the world. So sit back, relax, and join me as we get ready to think differently. Welcome to another episode of Think Differently. I am so excited about our guest today, who is a TEDx speaker and a leader in the field of neurodiversity employment. But not only is Dave Thompson all of these great things, he's a self-advocate with lived experience navigating the workplace with ADHD, dyslexia, and sensory processing issues. He's with us today so we can discuss the hidden struggles and the unique strengths of ADHD at work. And he's also going to give us a bit of insight on how embracing neurodiversity leads to innovation and success. So welcome, Dave, to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. Super stoked to be here.
Very excited to have you here. And I think a great place to start is your personal journey. So would you start by sharing, how did you come into knowing that having ADHD, dyslexia impacted you in the workplace and then led to you to kind of shift your career to support others with similar issues?
Yeah. So, and I think it's interesting because recently there's been such an explosion in newly identified adults, and that's such an important story, but it's not my story. I mean, this has always been part of my identity since kindergarten, at least the ADHD and dyslexia stuff, right? So I was really raised based on a medical model and a deficit-based model and kind of, identify or defined based on kind of what I can't do, right? And that to me, and the stigma around neurodiversity, those are probably the biggest barriers that I feel like I face, like socially constructed barriers, but it's not all pretty, right? So I was developmentally behind a lot of my peers growing up. I was in a separate classroom. This is 30 years ago. So I maybe my experience would be different if I was in school today. And, tied my shoes well after everybody else, rode a bike well after everybody else. I still have a lot of trouble with confusing my left and right, things like that. Failed my road test 4 times, dropped out of college 3 times. And so, and it was always kind of based on, he's not going to do that because he doesn't have to. Let's just get him through school. So like any electives, anything extra, I'm only in the yearbook in the background of candid pictures and then my actual yearbook photo. You know what I mean? And so I guess college was an opportunity for me to redefine myself like everybody else, right? And I really didn't bring that kind of baggage with me. And that's when I kind of, I guess, stopped disclosure wasn't a choice for a special ed kid, right? And so what's interesting is when you go to college, you can redefine yourself. And I didn't bring that identity with me. And it wasn't an empowering identity to me, So after struggling through school, all I could really picture doing was, I know it's a cliche, but being the person who I needed when I was younger, right? And so that was a very broad idea to me. I just wanted to kind of make the world a better place and help people. And so I got a job working in New York City with high risk or at risk teens, mostly in the New York City foster care system, caught up in various systems of juvenile justice and Office of Mental Health and things like that, many of whom were neurodistinct. And that's where I really started hitting my stride in realizing that I did have plenty to offer the world of work. That I'm a outgoing person, I'm an empathetic person, and I maybe I'm not good at payroll or spreadsheets or something like that, but I do have these skills that no one was really encouraging me to bring those out in me or for me to gain confidence in those areas. I was really disappointed with the lack of meaningful opportunity for underserved groups, and then entered the world of social enterprise. So like mission-driven nonprofit companies. I spent many years managing and scaling and replicating businesses, mostly with the mission of employing autistic young adults.
Okay.
Which is where I learned a lot about me and my brain and what sets me up for success. I was good at like making visuals and making these systems for neurodistinct professionals to be successful at work. And the reason why I was so good at it is because it was what I needed, right? So that's when things really, really started clicking for me. And during that time, I learned about the concept of neurodiversity in general. And that was a really, really empowering experience for me to start looking at my brain through a strengths-based approach. And at the same time, some of the world's largest companies were starting to talk about neurodiversity and the power of thinking differently. And despite working at a little startup operating out of one room, I got on the phone with them and felt like I was lucky. And they were telling me that they were the lucky ones, that they had plenty to learn from us too, especially because we were starting from the ground up. So I've kind of leveraged that knowledge in the mission, having led a bunch of mission-driven employment initiatives, and now help some of the biggest companies in the world.
And so your story actually takes us on that journey of how much things have changed in the space. Because when we were kids, we're close. When we were kids, you weren't supported, and all they focused on is all the things you couldn't do, right? All these things you can't do. And then you fast forward and you're like, your differences are being celebrated, not because you don't have difficulties. And one of the things you talked about is it wasn't your identity. You had that moment of it. You were forced to disclose as a child. In college, you did not disclose. And that's when you kind of came into your power. But now you do disclose again. And for those that can't see Dave, one of the things he's done that he talks about a lot, so I'm just going to share for those that may not know you, is that you just talked about left and right, and you have tattoos on your hand. When did you decide, I'm going to do what's best for me, I'm going to be proud of who I am, and you became like a role model of create the world that works for you, that concept of that social model of make the environment work for you, not focus on what you can't do? When did you make those changes?
That's a great question. I really appreciate that because I take it as a serious compliment. Just a note on my tattoos. I'm already heavily tattooed, so it wasn't a huge deal to get my hands. And it is fashion and function. So a lot of people say, why did you do this? You can just hold up your two L's, which doesn't really work for me, by the way. I'm dyslexic. But it's also just a point of pride around neurodiversity and the way my brain works. But it does help, especially when I'm driving and my hands are on 10 and 2, really does help. So yeah, what's interesting about that question is that I still wasn't bringing my full self to work, even once I was hitting my stride and kind of realizing internally, that the reason why I get it, the reason why I understand inclusion and neuro-inclusion and the need for it and some of the best practices and some of the innovations involved is because of my own brain. Even when I had realized that, I still didn't feel the psychological safety to just disclose outright to everyone. It's funny, a lot of the industries that should be the first to make it okay to disclose, industries like education, medicine, human services, academia, those are some of the last industries that people are disclosing in, even though you're talking about things like the differences in people's brains and the differences in how people live, learn, work, and communicate, right? So when I was working with at-risk teenagers in New York City, I disclosed to one teen in front of my supervisor when I first started because he was frustrated during homework hour, and I was actually frustrated too. I really don't like math. And so I leaned in and I let him know a little bit about my brain. I was advised, not ordered, but advised that it would be in my best interest to keep that stuff to myself. So I did for 10 years. And then I even gave my first TEDx talk without happening to mention my own brain. It wasn't until 2019 that I actually started talking about my own neurotype in this work, which is really wild when you think about it.
And as you're talking, like you find it surprising that like in education and medicine, you said, like these are the places that are designed to help folks.
Mm-hmm.
But if you think about it, they're also the ones that have created and designed everything based on a deficit medical model.
Mm-hmm.
So when you think about it, they probably will be the last ones to come along because a doctor doesn't look at how does our construct disable you. They look at you as an individual problem. So I think it's interesting that when you think of NASA and Google and Microsoft, they're focused on productivity and goals, right? They're looking at like, who can solve this mathematical equation? Who can solve this legal issue? And they don't really care about all the other things. It's like, can you get it done? And so I do think it's an interesting thing we see that the businesses that we see as most conservative and hard are actually the most flexible in having novel ways of getting things done because they're about making money, right? Or getting to the moon. I like to always joke about getting Matt Damon back from Mars. And then at the same time, your medical and educators, you're like, well, your job is to help people with differences, except everything that they're taught is like, there's the cans and cannots. And people who don't do things our way need to be fixed. And I know you're also friends with Joy Carol Nelson, and she likes to tell the story about back in the day when she was teaching, they would actually tie people's left arm behind their back so they could write. So I think it's a really interesting thing that like in school, where you are like forced to disclose, that's almost where you're the least safe. And then when you get into the workplace, there's like this baggage. You're like, should I disclose? It's a little upset to hear you had your employer go, don't tell anybody. And I want to kind of pack into that because I think you get asked this question a lot. I get asked this question all the time. Should I not disclose? What are your thoughts around that in terms of especially somebody with ADHD that has disclosed, has been discouraged to not disclose? There's pros and cons, right?
Right. And I think that first of all, I think it's completely up to the person. And I think it's highly individual depending on that person and where they're at in their journey, but also their environment, their work environment. I mean, the last thing I'd want to do is tell someone like, I live in Tennessee in like a heavily military town. And like, I know a few people who have ADHD that are not medicated for it, that are in the military. They could never disclose, like it would be like unsafe for them to disclose. They would be bullied and, so they don't have that privilege and that luxury of even thinking about it. Right. And I've been on that side of things where I really didn't feel okay disclosing. That said, there's two moments for me that are like, in a imaginary biopic about my life would be like these aha, inflection points that my trajectory changes. One is the discovery of the neurodiversity movement and the understanding that I can take a strength-based approach to my brain. The other one is actually fully disclosing. I mean, that was one of the most powerful moments for me, not even just in my professional career, but in my life. And that said, for years before that, I was disclosing quietly to quiet allies and people that I trusted. And I think a lot of the time when we're talking about these invisible differences, we're talking about certain environments where you're going to find the most help and the most practical help is with that favorite coworker or that favorite manager. Disclosure doesn't mean disclosing to an entire company, and it doesn't necessarily mean asking for anything. It doesn't mean anything but what it means. And so I'd encourage people to continue thinking and exploring those ideas because you can kind of curate your own individualized experience around what it means to talk about yourself and your brain and your needs at work. And also, what I hope to do is to help normalize being able to disclose your needs for support and tools and understanding flexibility without having to disclose your neurotype. Definitely without proving it, right? Definitely without providing any medical paperwork so you can wear noise canceling headphones to drown out the sound of your neighbor's chair squeaking. Like imagine that preventing someone from delivering fully for their employer, right? So you should be able to say, I need noise canceling headphones without having to say why.
I'm so glad you said that.
Yeah.
I'm so glad you said that, because one of the things, you give these talks, you meet people, and I hear like the same double-edged sword all the time. I'm not getting the supports I need. I'm afraid to disclose. What do I do? Because there is this double-edged sword that with the way things are set up, it's hard to get accommodations without disclosure. If you do disclose, there can be a stigma attached. And so there's a few things I always think about. So there's if you don't feel like you can disclose, you work in a workplace with a lack of psychological safety. However, it's not that easy to just determine, oh, this isn't a safe place to disclose, so I'm not going to work here. Like, I understand that that's not really an option. But then I've been telling folks, well, what is it that you're not getting that you need? Is there a way you can frame it up? So, many neurodivergent folks have issues with like note-taking and executive functioning. Well, that's like a project management 101. Like after a meeting, you should have meeting minutes and notes. So it's like, just bringing it up and say, hey, who's going to take the meeting notes and capture the key deliverables from this meeting? That's like a project management philosophy. It would get you the information you need. No need to disclose or have paperwork. So I know that I'm glad to hear it, like trying to give people strategies of how can I ask for what I need without saying I have a deficit, but more about how do we create this more productive workplace? And so that's like leaning towards, what are the challenges that you see and things that you could ask for that might mitigate them, right? Like the noise canceling headphones, but you don't have to come straight out and go, I'm neurodivergent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, and also a lot of that stuff is just best practices. It's just most things around neuroinclusivity are just workforce optimization, agile management and communication. It's all good stuff. Right. And so, yeah, flexibility in how and when and where you work. Meanwhile, a lot of clarity in what we're doing and why we're doing it, getting a lot of context. That's what I always say. I mean, there's always the what, why, where, when, how. Two of those need to be really solid, and everyone needs to be aligned on those two, the what and the why, right? What we're doing and why, and how do I fit into it? That's really, really important. But where, when, and how, I really benefit, and people really benefit when they're given some autonomy over when, where, and how. And I know not all industries and not all positions have that luxury, but there's plenty more things a lot of companies, especially like in the corporate world, can do to give people more autonomy over the when, where, and how.
And when you say that, if you think about it, people try to control the when, where, how, and have a real hard time articulating the what and why.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And there's also ROI on giving people flexibility on the when, where, how. I know that it's a real tough pill to swallow for a lot of people. And I also understand when I'm working with some of the world's biggest companies that there's reasons for stuff. Like there's reasons why they're not using Mac or Linux and they're using Windows. And like a new person can't just come in and say, well, this is my how. I get things done by using a completely different operating system, right? Like there's reasons for stuff, but providing the times and spaces to safely have those conversations is a teachable moment on both sides, right? And it's where innovation happens. It's where alignment happens. It just creates a better environment for employer, employee. I see a lot of room for improvement there. And when you are given that kind of freedom, it's huge. And then of course there's I don't want to say they're the typical ones or the easy ones, but there's lighting preferences, sensory preferences. I'm holding 3 different kinds of fidget spinners and stress balls and things right now, standing desks. I've joked with the folks from some of the biggest tech companies and others about how this idea of the modern workplace is so specific and so and the narrative is kind of like, we fixed work because like there's a ball pit next to you and everyone gets a scooter and there's a burrito place down the hall that you can smell. And, that is not everyone's, like these big co-working places with glass office doors and plants everywhere and stuff is not everyone's definition of like a meaningful workplace experience. And it's cool and it's fine. And in my circumstance, I would want to do that for like actual brainstorming and co-working and things like that. But when I need to get my stuff done, I'd rather be in a closet than be in an environment like that. So just open up your ideas of what it means. Everyone's idea of a meaningful workplace experience is individual and should be treated like that.
And that goes all to focus on the individual, give them the opportunity to accentuate their strengths. And so here's something that's been really big, especially in the last few years, where there's a movement about how neurodivergence isn't a disorder, it's a different way of being, and that there's strengths. We aren't going to get into that debate, but what I want to encapsulate is the strengths in terms of, we often hear about how ADHD, like if it's harnessed right, more creativity, hyper-focus, like these are skill sets that we should be capturing. I know you work with a lot of different employers. When you see that people are being supported, somebody's like, okay, so he's saying I need to be more flexible with the work environment. They may or may not need headphones or fidget spinners, but like, if I really support people, what can I expect? Are they really this exceptional?
So like you said, I don't want to, you and I could probably talk about like the disability versus superpower conversation all day. I think that that's an individual decision. That's all I'll say. I think it's an individual decision. And I have felt both ways. I will say that too. So what I prefer to do is talk about kind of like the net benefits of neuroinclusion, because you do get questions like, so what if I bring a bunch of these new hires that are neurodivergent in here? We're going to get what? They're going to invent the cure for cancer and do all these other, invent the next biggest tech innovation and work 300 times faster than everybody else, right? No, not on an individual level. It would be a very toxic thing for someone to promise something like that. However, yes, we do have and the easiest thing to do is probably to talk about me, since everyone is getting to know me now, and I don't want to talk about anybody else necessarily. I can work really, really fast. Luckily, I do what I'm passionate about, and if I didn't, a lot of us don't thrive doing work that we're not interested in. That's not a selfish thing. That's just the way a lot of people with ADHD are wired. That's part of our like dopamine seeking, I guess. We think outside, dyslexic thinkers think outside the box. So do ADHDers. We're naturally creative. And it's not just that we're like all a bunch of engineers inventing stuff. Innovation isn't necessarily about something like coding or something like that. It's about literally seeing things from a different angle, seeing things backwards, upside down, inside out, twice as fast, zoomed in, zoomed out, right? And when you create environments where people can rock and do their thing, you see it right away. And it's extremely, extremely exciting. And so encouraging for the individual to say, I'm good at something. I mean, I honestly never really felt like I was good at something. And I didn't know what it really felt like to be truly good at something until I was like 28 or something like that. Like that's when the same feeling my sister had of being like an all-state swimmer, or being going to the whatever the end of the Girl Scouts is. She went all the way, all that stuff. Like I never had anything in my life where I was like, I'm doing exceptionally well at this until this field, this work. And now, I mean, obviously, I have a lot to offer the world of work, and it's because I'm lucky enough to be part of an environment where I can be my authentic self, bring my whole self to work, and do what I need to do to set myself up for success.
Yeah. And I like that you said that like, you're not the panacea to solving necessarily the cure for cancer, finding the cure for cancer. But one of the things that I always try to tell folks is like neurodiversity includes you. And there'll be people that be like, but isn't that a neurodivergent thing? And oftentimes, like, you may be the innovator of the new idea, but we can squash creativity and innovation. So if we don't allow people to, like, if you're neurotypical out there, that means just more average wiring, but you're still special too. The truth is you have this opportunity where you can actually support people and allow them to be their best self, or you can squash it, right? So think about like teachers and managers. If you create these boxes and try to hold people in them, you know, maybe you're not the creative individual, but you can make or break the ability for innovation and creativity to happen. And I sometimes think people don't realize that little snide remark or the rolling of the eyes when there's an idea shared, that squashes creativity, that kills diversity, because you're creating an environment where I'm not going to share my ideas and I won't be able to do things differently. And so as I think about all this, you know, a lot of times in neurodiversity, it flips to autism. And that's why I really like having you here, because, you know, we're really bringing this view. And ADHD is a very big population in that neurodivergent umbrella. What do you think we need to do to make that part of the broader conversation of diversity? Because I feel like we talk about ADHD and dyslexia in education a lot more than we do in the workplace. How do we help employers kind of embrace this difference so that they're making sure we're supporting it and not, attaching stigmas to it? Because for me, I don't think ADHD is anything to like feel bad about, but I know that there's some misconceptions about it too.
Yeah. And I know that recently you've talked about psych safety and you talk a lot about it, but I think it comes down to that, and it comes down to what you said, stigma. I think that it meant a lot, for example, for I worked at an autistic majority company, but most of the people in leadership positions were not autistic. There were people up and down the pyramid there that were neurodistinct in some way, but for the most part, the entry level positions were taken by autistic professionals. Me disclosing as like a senior leader within a company with 150 or so employees was what made people feel very seen and very understood and respected and appreciated. And I think that overall, just showing vulnerability as a leader is such an important step. So sure, it can be about neurotype, but it doesn't need to be about neurotype. And it doesn't need to be about something so deeply personal either, right? Like it can be about, you know, joking and being honest about the fact that you don't know how to rotate a PDF or that you're bad at spreadsheets or something like that. The week that I decided to start disclosing at work in 2019, I was at a conference where someone from the federal government came up on the stage and he said, I have ADHD. And then the next person that went up said, that was from a Fortune 100 company, said, I am not neurodivergent in any way, but I am a recovering alcoholic. And I just want to let everybody know that. And it doesn't have to be that personal, but that moment for me in that room, and it was a neurodiversity focused conference, I was like, well, that was deliberate. What was that for? Right. And it wasn't just like, oh, me too, I have a thing. It wasn't like whataboutism or anything like that. It was to show that person's a real person with real history and real struggles, and that they're trying to just deliver fully at this conference, and it was helpful to them, and they felt it might be helpful to others to let people know something about them. That was a real moment for me. So I think that it needs to start to some extent from the top, not just from, you know, something like corporate literature and what you say in your DEI statement, which is also important, but it's not going to that stuff isn't going to happen unless people are doing it. And so like normalize what makes you different, everybody. But the burden shouldn't be on this like entry level neurodivergent person that does not have the privilege of psych safety at work, right?
Yeah. And as you're talking, it's one of those things that when a lot of people read about how to create psychologically safe places, we often talk about, making sure that people feel safe to talk to the leader, that they're supported, that there's trust, not just in task, but in relationship. But one of the things, and you just shared it, walked right into it, thank you, is that leaders have to be humble and show humility, and they have to be the model of what trust would be like. I don't think it's right. And I know a lot of companies did this about 10 years ago and still had these initiatives where they're like, you belong here. We want you to be here, self-disclose. And you would get a little pockets of a senior leader here and there saying, I have ADHD or, some other disability, but it was, little bespoke things. And for somebody to feel safe, they want to make sure that they are understood. And so, like you said, you don't have to have a disability. You don't have to necessarily be in some sort of minority demographic group to just share an authentic self, have some humility, even if it's just admitting to your team that you made a mistake and overcame it in the workplace, little things that just show we all have obstacles. Maybe you're not great with remembering meetings, or maybe you're always late to events. Those little things don't necessarily make you disabled, but they do show that you're not perfect. And if we all can kind of show our flaws just a little bit, then somebody might be more willing to say, I could use a hand. And I think that takes some courage from leaders too.
Yeah. And I think that, beyond DEI, people do need to understand that I don't want to make this this performance-based, oh, you're going to be making way more money if you do this. But people should understand that there is an exclusion tax, that your companies are less efficient and innovative and productive, and your employees are less engaged, and they're going to stay less time because this stuff isn't normalized, right? I do want to make sure I mention at some point. I have a friend that her story just kind of blows my mind. I'd love to introduce you if you don't know Trina Haynes. My Lady ADHD is her social media name. She was in marketing, corporate marketing, and she was late diagnosed ADHD. She started an Instagram account. She had 50,000 followers without her employer knowing that she had ADHD. Now, when you talk about someone in marketing, don't you think you'd want someone who knows how to just on the side casually start an Instagram account and gain 50,000 followers? She didn't stay at that company. She left. Now she has 250,000 followers. And she's she's a marketing professional.
Right. That's her thing.
So look at what you're missing out on when you're not creating neuro-inclusive spaces. You know what I mean?
And so are you saying that she left the company because she never felt like she could disclose, or did they in some way push her out?
That's a good question. I'm not, you got to bring her on the show and get down to it. I'm not sure if she left after disclosing or left and never disclosed. I'm not sure which one it is, but regardless, her story is unbelievable because she is a massively influential person in this, especially in this late diagnosed woman, identity that I am very much not a part of, but can see and appreciate. And yeah, definitely get in touch with her. I'll hook you two up.
That'd be fantastic. And so, I just think about so she had challenges, you have challenges. It's one of those things. I see this trend where neurodivergent folks are leaving work and going off on their own. But the truth is not everybody wants to do that. Not everybody wants to be an advocate for, their disability or condition or difference in superpower. So what advice do you give for people that are I work at this company. I actually like my job. I don't know if it's the most psychologically safe place. I don't want to be told just quit because it's just not that easy. I've put in my time. What do I do? How do I make my workplace better? If not today, tomorrow?
That's a great question. I do like to, whenever directly addressing neurodivergent professionals, just say that in case it's your first time hearing it, and it probably isn't if you've made it all the way to this podcast, right? But you're not the problem. you've been surviving in a world that wasn't built with you in mind. And so it's the world of work that needs to catch up to us. That said, so the burden should not be on us, right? But that said, we are surviving and doing what we have to do. And so, yes, we shouldn't all be self-advocates. And like, I see all these people getting diagnosed and then going into the self-advocacy space because it's so empowering and they want to work in a place that's inclusive. But maybe that person is a graphic designer and they're not desperate to work for a company like Potential Workforce or something like that, and they want to work for a car dealership. Like, they should be able to do that and work in an environment that works for them, right? And so I'm really sympathetic to that, because this happens to be my special interest, my passion, where I want to be. I'm not like, oh, I wish I was an accountant at H&R Block or something. Like, that's not my brain at all. A few things. I mean, I would just encourage, kind of like what you said earlier, Teresa, there's a way to encourage positive change at work without making it about you. And so that include, whether that is mentioning neurodiversity or not, things like knowing what the meeting is about before the meeting. That's a normal thing to ask for. That should not be considered some sort of massive accommodation. Or knowing how long a meeting is supposed to be. These are, or again, flexibility in when, where, and how. Again, I understand why there's rigidities and impossibilities there. People gasp sometimes at big companies when they hear that I want people to provide that flexibility when they can. And also getting into the more neurodiversity kind of specific stuff. Employee resource groups are a massive source of support for neurodivergent colleagues. And also, it creates a more self-sustaining ecosystem that the company can depend on. Like, who are they going to talk to when, the next big thing happens? Like, God forbid, COVID really changed what it looked like to be an employee at most companies, right? And so we want to be ready for evolving as a business along with this evolving conversation around neurodiversity. So you want to empower your people to have a voice and to share what they want to see in the workplace. And again, I don't want to pressure anyone to disclose, but keep exploring what you're good at, what you're passionate about, what your challenges and barriers are, how to mitigate those when possible, and make peace with them when they're not. And, sometimes disclosure works on a wide scale, but more often I see people disclosing to just a few trusted colleagues or a few trusted people from their field or whatever. And that's really, really helpful too. But you need to have people to talk to, I think that's really important. And I'm sure you get this all the time. I have people reaching out to me all the time that just need some sort of, just someone to talk about what frustrates them about, kind of fitting square pegs into round holes and stuff at work. We need those times and spaces.
We do. We need those times. We need those spaces. And if you need someone to talk to, there's so many groups online via LinkedIn, Twitter or X, whatever it's called this week, and Facebook and other sorts of groups. Obviously, you can find Dave or myself online. But one of the things I always like to remind everyone is that if you're hearing some of the things we're talking about, or if you're part of what I call the spiral, and the spiral is social media because it curates to your interest, just be mindful that Dave and I are working towards a future that doesn't fully exist yet. So if you're at a workplace that isn't fully neurodiversity inclusive, we know. And you may be living this reality of you could be your whole self as part of these groups. I don't know about you, Dave, but my feed, I would think the whole world is DEI focused because that's so much of what, the algorithms now curate for me. So just be mindful that we're still a small percentage in this larger world. And we get it, and we see you, and we hear you, and we know you, and we're working to make it. So these strategies, if you are in a company that's not quite there yet, they don't fully get neurodivergence, these strategies of working to find ways to get what you need without full disclosure are the first step to get people to think more flexibly about how to work with others. And over time, that might actually create the safe space that you wish you had right now, where you could just say, I'm ADHD, I'm autistic, and I need X. So if it doesn't feel great when you read things and go, I wish I had this too, we hear you. And that's what we're working towards, to get it to that desired neurodiversity state, because we're not there yet.
Not even close. Very lucky to work in, kind of a self-fulfilling cycle, like an echo chamber. And I cannot picture myself at my age working somewhere where that didn't work for me. So I really am so empathetic to those people that you're talking to.
So as we come to the end of our time together, because it always goes by so fast, is there anything that we didn't touch on that you'd like to share with the audience before we go?
I guess just to neurodivergent professionals and job seekers, potential workforce does have an NDTC, ND talent community, where we kind of give resources and opportunities for peer support and things like that. I have a monthly group call. It's not a webinar, but a monthly group call with a different topic every month. Would love for you to join and check that out. And obviously to employers, there's plenty of work going on to support you in your journey. And I do want to give some empathy to employers in that I understand companies' nervousness to dip their toes in, because it is a rapidly evolving and growing space with a lot, and it's highly personal to a lot of people. And it is easy to get things wrong. And that is why there are people like Dr. Teresa Haskins and Dave Thompson to support you with that. So feel free to reach out to us. And this is happening with or without you. So hop on.
Yes, join the movement. Join us. So, Dave, I cannot thank you enough for our conversation today. And to the audience, if you have questions, please reach out to us, because we really are here to help you. Whether you're an employer or an individually impacted individual or a caretaker of somebody that feels the person they love needs support, we're always here for you. I hope that everyone enjoyed this episode, kind of getting a view of the hidden aspects of ADHD, and continue to inspire you to think differently, because we can all make neurodiversity in the workplace a reality. Thanks so much for being part of this, Dave.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Think Differently. I hope you found our discussion today insightful and thought-provoking. I want to thank Audio Work Studios for their exceptional production and recording support. Without their expertise and dedication, this podcast would not be possible. If you enjoyed this episode, we encourage you to share it with others. Your support helps us to reach new audiences and promote neurodiversity in our world. Also, be sure to subscribe to this podcast on iHeartRadio, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite platform so that you can stay up to date on the latest episodes. We look forward to seeing you again soon on Think Differently.